Okay, let's just jump right into this. I want you to try and picture something for a second. Imagine you are standing right in the middle of a trading pit in the 1980s.
Oh, man.
Yeah, not the silent, screen-based stuff we have today. I mean,
Yeah.
visceral, chaotic, physical trading. It smells like stale coffee, sweat, and just pure anxiety.
Right, guys screaming orders, waving those paper tickets, literally shoving each other out of the way. It was basically a contact sport.
Exactly. And right in the middle of this absolute rugby scrum stands a guy named Joe Siegel. And Joe is a titan. I mean, he is one of the most successful traders in the entire world.
And he deals in one very specific commodity, right?
Green lumber. That is his thing. He has made millions on it. He's the guy that everybody else on the floor watches. If Joe makes a move, the whole market shifts.
So, logically, you'd assume this guy knows absolutely everything there is to know about wood.
You would. You'd think he dreams about pine trees and moisture content. So one day, somebody, maybe a curious rookie on the floor or a journalist, asks him, hey, Joe, why do they actually call it green lumber?
A completely normal question for the king of the market.
Right. And Joe looks at them, dead serious, total confidence, and says, well, obviously, it's because the wood has been painted green.
Which is just incredible.
He wasn't joking at all. He genuinely, deep down, believed that green lumber was just regular wood that someone had taken a paintbrush to and painted green.
Which, I mean, let's just clarify for anyone listening who hasn't built a deck recently, that is completely wrong.
It's so wrong. Green lumber just means it's freshly cut. It hasn't been dried in a kiln yet.
Right. It's got a high moisture content. It's heavy. It warps. It shrinks. The word green is a technical term about the age and state of the wood, not the color.
But here's the absolute kicker. Here is the mystery we are unpacking in today's deep dive. Joe Siegel was wildly rich. He was successful. He was the absolute best in the game.
While at the exact same time, you had people writing the definitive textbooks on commodities, people who knew the botanical Latin names of every tree.
Yeah, the experts who knew the precise cellular structure of a pine needle, the exact moisture percentage that defines green lumber, and those guys were going bust in the market.
They were losing their shirts.
So how is that possible? We are all raised on this very clear, very linear equation, right? You go to school, you learn the definitions, you memorize the theory, and then you get the success. Knowledge equals power.
But Joe Siegel completely breaks that equation. He proves you can be objectively, factually wrong about the what and still completely master the how.
And that is our mission today. We are going to explore why knowing the definition of a thing and actually being successful at it are so often two completely different things.
Our source material calls this the green lumber fallacy.
The green lumber fallacy.
It's this pervasive mistake we make. We mistake a source of necessary knowledge, the actual stuff you need to function for something that just looks important from the outside, a narrative.
We confuse the map with the territory.
Exactly. And this concept, it goes way beyond just trading wood. We are going to look at why standard education might not actually cause economic wealth, why street smarts routinely crush Ivy League degrees on trading floors, and why, honestly, your grandmother's advice is probably scientifically superior to a Harvard business degree.
I love that. Grandma versus the Ivy League.
Yeah.
But before we get to the grandmothers, we have to start with something that honestly made me a little uncomfortable when I first read our sources because I liked school. I'm a fan of education.
Most of us are.
But the material starts with this scene in Abu Dhabi that totally flips the script on the value of formal education.
It's a really provocative opening observation. The author is standing in Abu Dhabi looking at this miraculous skyline of glass and steel just springing out of the empty desert.
Watered by oil, as he calls it.
Right. But he isn't just admiring the architecture. He actually says he feels a sense of nausea.
Nausea, and not from the desert heat.
No, intellectual nausea. Because he's watching what the government is doing with all that massive oil wealth. They are importing universities. They are paying huge sums to bring the Sorbonne and NYU right into the desert.
Which, to me, sounds like a pretty noble idea. If I'm running a country and I suddenly have billions in cash, I want to educate my citizens. I want to buy them the absolute best schools in the world so they can build a modern, diversified economy. That's the standard global playbook. Why on earth does that make him sick?
Because he views it as the green lumber fallacy playing out on a massive national scale. He's arguing that they are buying the painted wood, the diplomas, the grand buildings, the Western administration, and they're doing it because they believe those things actually cause wealth.
You say they don't.
He's saying it is a complete superstition. It's cargo cult thinking. We all have this causal arrow stuck in our heads. Education leads to economic growth. We think just educate the masses and the economy will naturally boom.
Better workers, smarter ideas, more money. It feels intuitive.
But he flips the arrow completely. He proposes that wealth leads to education, not the other way around.
Okay, hold on. Wealth leads to education. So a country has to get rich first, by some other means, and only then do they bother building the fancy schools.
Essentially, yes. He argues that formal institutional education, especially the highly theoretical university kind, is an epiphenomenon.
The epiphenomenon. Okay, break that down for us.
Think of the plumage on a peacock. A male peacock grows those massive, vibrant, beautiful tail feathers because it is already healthy, strong, and well-fed. The feathers are a signal that it has excess resources.
Okay.
But the feathers don't make the bird healthy. If you found a sick, starving bird in the woods and glued a bunch of magnificent feathers to its tail, it wouldn't magically become strong.
That is a very vivid image. So education is the peacock's tail.
Exactly. It's something wealthy societies spend their money on because they can afford to. It's a luxury good. It's the fancy dining car sitting at the very back of the train, but we keep mistaking it for the engine pulling the train at the front.
That sounds incredibly cynical to me. I mean, is there actual hard empirical data to back this up? Because I can hear you listening right now, yelling at your device, saying, but look at Germany, look at the US. They are highly educated and they are rich.
And that is what we call the fooled by randomness effect. You're mistaking an association for a cause. Rich countries also have high rates of decadence or even certain types of cancer. But we don't go around saying that decadence causes wealth.
Fair point.
And yes, the source brings receipts. They cite data from Lant Pritchet, who is at the World Bank, and the economist Ha-Joon Chang. They tracked countries' development over decades. The ultimate contrast is Taiwan and the Philippines, starting back in 1960.
Okay, set the stage for us. What was going on in 1960?
In 1960, the Philippines was the absolute darling of Asia. They had remarkably high literacy rates, tons of universities, a very westernized, credentialed population. If you believe that education leads to wealth, you would have bet your entire life savings on the Philippines becoming the next global superpower.
And what about Taiwan?
Taiwan was the exact opposite. Largely illiterate, very poor. Their income per person was half that of the Philippines.
Half. Wow. So fast forward to today.
Today, Taiwan has roughly 10 times the income of the Philippines. 10 times. The country that started off dumb, quote-unquote, but industrious, won completely. The country that started smart and heavily credentialed totally stagnated.
Why? What was the actual mechanism there?
The argument is that the Philippines focused on the narrative. They produced lawyers, bureaucrats, people who could push paper and speak eloquently. Taiwan focused on the green lumber. They just started making things.
The messy stuff.
Right. Small plastic parts, cheap electronics, basic manufacturing. They learned strictly by doing. They figured out how to make a little widget for 5 cents and sell it for 10 cents. That is the actual engine of growth. The formal education came much later, once they had the cash to afford the peacock feathers.
And there's another comparison in the source too, right?
Yeah.
Korea versus Argentina.
Same exact story. Argentina has historically been one of the most literate, highly sophisticated European-style countries in the world.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in 1960, Korea was just crawling out from a devastating war. Very poor, much lower literacy. But today, Korea's income is 3 times that of Argentina.
It's pretty damning evidence when you look at it on a macro level. But I really have to push back here on a personal level. I'm thinking about my own life, and I know you are too. I went to college. That degree absolutely got me my first job. If I hadn't gone, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. So for me, education definitely led to wealth.
And that is a totally valid point. But our sources make a very crucial distinction here. You have to separate the role of education for the individual from the role of education for the country.
Okay, how so?
For you, as an individual person, a degree is a sorting hat. It's a credential. It's a way to signal to an employer, hey, look at me, I am disciplined, I can sit still in a chair for 4 years, I can follow complex instructions, and I fit into your corporate tribe.
So it's just a signaling mechanism.
Exactly. It helps you compete against other individuals for the existing pool of jobs. It stabilizes your own family's income across generations. But, and here is the key, that effect washes out at the national level. It's a zero-sum game.
Because if everyone has a degree,
The degree becomes completely worthless. Then you need a master's degree just to get an entry-level job. Then a PhD. It's just credential inflation. You're running faster just to stay in the exact same place. It doesn't actually make the economic pie any bigger for the nation as a whole.
Right. So if I'm a government planner, just building 100 shiny new schools isn't enough. I actually need to create the raw conditions where that green lumber knowledge, that practical, messy, tinkering street knowledge can thrive.
Yes. And that usually requires some level of necessity. The author talks about his own home village in Lebanon, Amun. During the war, it was completely pillaged, evacuated, utterly destroyed. By all conventional logic, it should have remained a permanent ruin. But 25 years later, he goes back, and it's opulent. It's wealthier than it was before the war.
Because they had to hustle. They had no other choice.
Necessity. The Romans actually had a saying for this. Poverty makes experiences. Sophistication is born of absolute need. The people there didn't have the luxury of sitting around debating economic theory. They had to rebuild their lives from the rubble. And that immense stressor is what generates real, functional knowledge, not a safe, comfortable lecture hall.
Man, this idea of real knowledge versus lecture hall knowledge brings us perfectly back to the trading floor. The author tells this fantastic story about his own personal shock moving from an Ivy League academic environment straight to a Wall Street trading pit. And again, it's all about this massive gap between expectations and reality.
Right. So the author is coming from a very polished academic background, Wharton, the Ivy League. He enters the brutal world of high finance, specifically currency trading. Now, if you haven't been in that world, imagine what you would expect it to look like.
Well, if I'm trading literally billions of dollars in Swiss francs or Japanese yen, I expect extreme sophistication.
Yeah.
I'm picturing guys in bespoke suits, maybe wearing ascots, who read the Financial Times every morning, who sit around debating the nuanced geopolitical implications of some trade treaty in Brussels.
That is the painted green expectation. You expect the narrative of the job to perfectly match the function. But the reality, he says the most successful traders were what he bluntly calls street people.
Street people, like New Jersey, Brooklyn, thick accents, working class backgrounds.
Exactly. And in the London office, it was even more extreme. He describes them as sub-blue collar. These were East London cockneys. These weren't guys who road crew at Oxford. They were guys who probably started out as runners or back office clerks and just scrapped their way onto the floor.
They even had their own complete language, right? I love this detail in the source. They didn't say, I'll buy 5 million.
No, they used their own rhyming slang. So the number 5 was a Lady Godiva.
Lady Godiva.
Yeah. Lady Godiva rhymes with fiver. Fiver means 5.
That's wild.
And 15 was a Commodore, 25 was a pony. If you walked onto that floor with your shiny PhD in macroeconomics, you literally wouldn't even understand the words they were shouting at each other.
And the culture was definitely not scholarly.
Not at all. Their motto was basically, beer turns you into a lion. They would literally go to the pub, drink 3 or 4 heavy pints with lunch, and then stumble back just in time for the New York market to open.
It sounds incredibly reckless. It just sounds like pure gambling.
Yeah.
And here is the green lumber twist. Hitting us again. They were winning. These guys were absolutely crushing the Ivy League guys.
Because they weren't overthinking the narrative, they were just reading the tape, they were watching the price action. They fundamentally did not care why the price was moving, they only cared that it was moving and how to position themselves around it.
Which culminates in one of the best stories in the whole deep dive, the legend of the Swiss franc trader.
Something that ends with a vowel.
Yes. This guy is the ultimate embodiment of the green lumber character.
Yeah.
Set this guy up for us.
So this guy is a massive hitter. He is the single biggest trader of Swiss francs in the entire world. During the 1980s, he perfectly predicts the collapse of the US dollar. He takes massive positions. He is literally moving the global market by himself. And the author, being an intellectual, finally gets the chance to meet him. He's expecting this quiet, brilliant Swiss banking mastermind.
And what does he actually find?
He discovers that this man, the biggest Swiss franc trader on earth, cannot find Switzerland on a map.
Come on. That can't be real.
It is entirely real. He literally didn't know it was a country in Central Europe. He didn't know the capital city. He didn't know that the people in the southern part of the country spoke Italian. He knew absolutely zero geographical, cultural, or macroeconomic facts about the actual country of Switzerland.
My brain just refuses to accept this. How do you trade the currency of a sovereign nation if you don't even know where it is?
Because he wasn't trading Switzerland the country. He was trading this Swiss franc the asset. He understood the flow of the numbers. He understood that when the digits on his screen did X, they would almost always do Y next. He deeply understood the fear and greed and psychology of the other traders in the pit.
He understood the function, not the trivia.
Okay. Exactly. Knowing that Geneva is a banking center is just a narrative. It's painted wood. Knowing that when the U.S. Federal Reserve moves the prime rate by half a point, the franc reacts in this one very specific exploitable way that is the actual lumber.
And the author mentions that this realization made him physically nauseous again. It's this profound de-intellectualization. It's the crushing realization that all those heavy textbooks he read, all those theories he memorized, were essentially just decoration.
It's a massive blow to the ego. We all desperately want to believe that being smart in the traditional IQ book-reading sense is what guarantees success. It is deeply humbling to realize that a guy who probably thinks Switzerland is somewhere near Australia can completely eat your lunch because he understands the mechanics of the market better than you do.
And this brings us to the real hero of our story today, the philosophical anchor of this whole concept, Fat Tony.
Fat Tony. He is the ultimate anti-academic. He's a recurring character the author uses to represent pure, unadulterated street smarts.
Picture him in your head. He's loud, he's probably eating a huge sandwich, and he is deeply, profoundly unimpressed by your college degree.
He is not impressed by anything except actual results, money in the bank. And there's this one very specific story about the 1991 Iraq War that just perfectly illustrates the vast difference between thinking about a problem and actually profiting from it.
Okay, let's set the scene for everyone. It's 1991. The U.S. military is gearing up to invade Iraq to push them out of Kuwait.
Right. Global tension is sky high. The whole world is watching this play out on CNN. Now, if you are a thinker, a geopolitical analyst, a journalist, a standard Ivy League fund manager, what is your logical narrative here?
Well, war equals chaos. War in the Middle East specifically means massive oil supply disruptions. Therefore, war means the price of oil is going to skyrocket. It's simple, supply and demand.
That is the perfectly logical, linear academic narrative. A leads directly to B. And the vast majority of smart people believed this. They were aggressively buying up oil futures, betting on a massive price spike the second the bombs dropped.
And what is Fat Tony doing?
Well, first of all, Fat Tony barely knows where Iraq is. He thinks it might be somewhere near Pakistan or maybe Morocco. He definitely doesn't know the historical difference between Sunni and Shiite populations. But he asks a completely different question than the experts. He asks, what is everybody else in the market currently doing?
And since everybody else expects the price to go up.
They have already bought the oil. The expectation of the war is already priced in. Tony realizes that if absolutely everyone has already placed their bets on a massive spike, there is literally nobody left to buy once the war actually starts. So if the oil fields aren't immediately vaporized, the price can only go in one direction.
Down.
So he takes the other side, he bets against the war spike. He aggressively shorts oil. He bets it will crash. And he was completely right. The war started, the physical supply wasn't actually disrupted as badly as the experts feared, and the price of oil completely collapsed. It dropped from $39 a barrel to half that value almost overnight.
And Tony made a fortune.
He turned $300,000 into $18 million.
$18 million? By knowing significantly less about the country of Iraq than the guys who lost all their money.
By knowing less about Iraq, but knowing infinitely more about market positioning. And he gives us this brilliant maxim that should honestly be framed on every investor's wall. He says, Kuwait and oil are not the same ting.
Not the same ting. It's the concept of conflation.
Conflation. We constantly merge two things in our minds that should remain totally separate. We think that understanding the complex geopolitical map of Iraq is exactly the same thing as understanding the trading price of a barrel of oil.
Our sources actually contrast Tony with a specific fund manager who had built himself a literal war room.
Oh, this poor guy, yes. He had a giant map of Iraq pinned to his wall. He was obsessively tracking every single UN security resolution. He knew the name and background of every Iraqi general. He suffered from what the author calls the map problem.
The map problem, meaning he had so much detailed information, so much noise and smoke, that he completely missed the actual fire.
He was trying to use a logical narrative geopolitics to predict the behavior of a complex, irrational system, the market. Tony just ignored the narrative completely and looked at the simple asymmetry of the bet.
This idea asymmetry of focusing on the potential payoff rather than the intellectual logic leads us into a really fascinating mythological comparison. Prometheus and Epimetheus.
I love this part. I always love when we get to bring ancient Greek mythology into a discussion about modern finance. It just fits so perfectly.
So Prometheus.
hmm
Most people know him as the guy who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity.
Right. And his name literally translates to forethinker, thinking ahead. In the context of our deep dive today, Prometheus represents the concept of optionality.
Okay, we need to pause here and define optionality clearly because it can sound a bit like Wall Street jargon. How do we explain this to someone who doesn't trade options for a living?
Optionality is simply having choices. It is designing your life or your investments so that you do not have to be perfectly right in order to win. Think of it like being a carpenter who builds houses, but who also plays guitar in a wedding band on the weekends, and maybe rents out a spare room in his house on Airbnb.
You've got options, diversified income streams.
Exactly. If the local construction market completely crashes, you still have the wedding band. If the band breaks up, you still have the rental income. You don't need a crystal ball to perfectly predict the macroeconomic future of the housing industry to survive. You possess what we call convexity.
Convexity, another heavy term. Break that one down.
Visualize a simple smile shape. A curve that goes up at both ends, or even just a curve that stays flat on the bottom left and swoops way up on the right. A convex position in life means this. If things stay completely normal and boring, I'm fine. I don't lose much. But if things go absolutely crazy, I stand to make a massive amount of money or gain a massive advantage.
Like Fat Tony's oil bet.
Yeah.
If oil just stayed flat, he might lose a little bit in fees.
Yeah.
But if oil crashed, he made $18 million.
Precisely. Low, strictly capped downside, coupled with massive, virtually unlimited upside. That is the Promethean mindset. Looking forward, looking for multiple options, looking to position yourself on the right side of that smile curve.
So what about his brother?
Epimetheus.
Epimetheus literally translates to afterthinker. He's the guy in the myth who foolishly accepts Pandora's box. He
Yeah.
represents the narrative mindset. He is always looking backward at the past.
He's the ultimate Monday morning quarterback. Exactly. He looks at what happened yesterday and he writes a very clever logical story explaining why it happened. Oh, the market crashed because of variable X. Or Germany lost the war because of decision Y. It feels incredibly satisfying to our brains. It feels like real knowledge. But it is concave.
Meaning it's fragile.
Extremely fragile.
Right.
Because you start to deeply believe that your neat little story is the absolute truth. You build your entire worldview or your investment portfolio based on what happened in the past. And then, inevitably, something entirely new happens. A black swan event that doesn't fit into your neat little narrative. And because you didn't have any options, because your position wasn't convex, you get completely wiped out.
So Epimetheus is the brilliant historian writing a best-selling book explaining exactly why the Titanic sank. But Prometheus is the pragmatic guy who just demanded they put extra lifeboats on the ship before it sailed, just in case.
That is a phenomenal analogy. Yes. Prometheus fundamentally does not need to know how or why the iceberg is going to hit the ship. He just knows that if it does hit, he wants a guaranteed seat in a lifeboat. That is pure green lumber thinking. You focus entirely on the survival function and you ignore the intellectual explanation.
The huge problem for us, though, is that human beings are fundamentally wired for stories. We're completely addicted to Epimetheus.
We are. Narratives are incredibly comfortable psychologically. It feels really, really good to be able to sit at a dinner party and say, I understand exactly how the world works. Optionality, on the other hand, is stressful. It demands that you constantly say, I have absolutely no idea what is going to happen tomorrow, but I have positioned myself to survive anything. That is a much harder way to live day to day, but over the long run, it is infinitely safer.
Now, the source material throws us a bit of a curveball right here. It argues that sometimes relying on completely false narratives can actually be a good thing.
Yes, treating narratives purely as instruments rather than universal truths. He uses this great historical example of Boney.
Boney, meaning Napoleon Bonaparte.
Right. During the Napoleonic Wars, English parents used to terrify their children by telling them, you better behave and go to sleep, or Boney will come out of the woods and take you away.
Now, obviously, is the Emperor of France actually hiding in the rose bushes of a tiny cottage in Sussex, waiting to kidnap a toddler? No.
The narrative is objectively completely false. It is a lie. But you have to ask the functional question, does it work?
Well, if the kid stays terrified in bed and doesn't wander out into the dark woods and get eaten by a wolf or fall in a well, then yes, it works perfectly.
Exactly. The actual function of the narrative was child survival. The factual truth of the narrative was completely irrelevant.
This is a massive distinction. The intellectual academic obsesses over whether a statement is perfectly true. But the doer, the practitioner, only obsesses over whether the statement actually works in the real world.
And this naturally brings us right into the talkers versus doers problem, which is rampant, especially in the modern corporate world. I guarantee a lot of you listening right now have experienced this firsthand. It's driven by the halo effect.
Oh man, the halo effect. This explains the story behind almost every single bad hiring decision I have ever made in my career.
We all do it. We see someone who is highly articulate, they dress immaculately, they have a great firm handshake, they look and sound exactly like a leader should. Maybe we find out they're an expert chess player or a competitive skier, and our brain automatically jumps to the conclusion, wow, this person is so impressive, they must be incredible at corporate management.
We take a visible skill from one specific area, like talking well or looking polished, and we blindly transfer it to a completely unrelated area, like running a complex logistics company.
And it is completely deadly to an organization. The author suggests a very strict heuristic to fight this. He says, always separate skills at doing from skills at talking.
He draws a hard line between entrepreneurs and bureaucrats.
Right. Think about real artisans or gritty entrepreneurs. Not the polished ones selling courses on Instagram, but the men and women actually grinding away in a machine shop or a startup garage. They are very often incoherent. They might stutter. They might have terrible grammar. They might be socially awkward or completely rude.
Because they simply don't need to be smooth.
Yeah.
The quality of their physical product does all the talking for them.
Exactly. If the software works flawlessly or the engine part is perfect, I really don't care if the CEO communicates in grunts. But compare that to the typical bureaucrat, a mid-level manager at a massive Fortune 500 company.
Their daily output is completely invisible. You can't put it on a scale and measure it.
So how do they survive? How do they get promoted? By being elegant, by delivering incredibly slick PowerPoint presentations, by mastering the current corporate buzzwords, by being, as the author puts it, a highly polished dinner partner.
Oh, he's a great guy to grab a beer with.
Great.
That is exactly how you fail upwards in a bureaucracy.
But that is exactly how you eventually end up with a fragile company full of empty suits. The author states it very bluntly. If I have to choose between a smooth-talking, multilingual UN diplomat and a socially awkward, heavily accented engineer to build a bridge, I have to drive my family across. I am taking the engineer every single time. The diplomat has the beautiful narrative, but the engineer has the green lumber.
And there is absolutely no better proof of this, ignore the talker's philosophy, than the story of Jim Simons.
Oh, Jim Simons, the legendary founder of Renaissance Technologies, the Medallion Fund. Literally the most successful, consistent money-making machine in the history of Wall Street.
But Simons wasn't a Wall Street guy. He was a pure mathematician, a former code breaker. And when he decided to build his hedge fund, he implemented a very, very specific hiring policy.
He hired astrophysicists, he hired astronomers, cryptographers, experts in speech recognition and signal processing. He actively sought out people who knew how to look at an overwhelming sea of raw data and pull out tiny repeating patterns in the noise.
And more importantly, who did he completely ban from the building?
Economists, finance PhDs, traditional Wall Street analysts. He literally wouldn't hire them.
Why ban the experts in finance from a finance company?
Because they showed up loaded with prepackaged narratives. An economist looks at a chart and says, yes, the price is moving because of the macroeconomic supply curve and the rational behavior of the market actors. Simons didn't want any of that. He said, I completely do not care why it's happening. I just see a mathematical pattern that repeats 51% of the time. When the squiggly line goes up, our computers buy. That's it.
It is the ultimate expression of the green lumber fallacy. He completely stripped away the intellectual why and focused 100% on the what happens next.
And that singular focus made him billions of dollars. But then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have a story like Ariel Rubinstein.
This story actually made me respect Rubinstein immensely. He is an absolute giant in his field. He is a leading mind in game theory.
And game theory, for context, is the intense mathematical study of strategic decision-making and bargaining. It is widely taught as the absolute definitive theory of everything when it comes to human negotiation.
So Rubinstein is traveling in the Levant, and he's wandering through a traditional souk, a bustling street market. and he decides he wants to buy an item from a vendor.
And he thinks to himself, okay, I am literally one of the world's most renowned academic experts in the mathematics of bargaining. I am going to deploy my mathematically optimal strategy right now.
He unleashes the full power of game theory on this guy.
And the vendor, who is just a classic, street-smart, fat Tony type, just looks at this brilliant professor, completely shuts him down and says, my friend, for generations we have bargained this way, and you show up and try to change it.
The beautiful mathematical theory completely crashed into messy human reality.
And the incredible thing is that Rubinstein actually admits it. He writes in his own book that he walked away from that market feeling shamefaced. He had this epiphany that his entire celebrated theory was essentially just a fable. It's a fun intellectual puzzle to solve in a classroom, but it has absolutely zero utility when it comes to how actual flesh and blood humans buy vegetables in a market.
That level of intellectual honesty is so rare. To look in the mirror and say, my life's work is a fable. You really do not hear experts admit that very often.
No, you don't. And it leads us perfectly into the final, and I think arguably the most important lesson of this entire deep dive. Because if the Nobel Prize-winning professors are constantly wrong in the real world, who is actually right?
Grandma.
Grandma is right.
We are getting into the concept of evolutionary epistemology, which, yes, sounds like an absolute mouthful of academic jargon, but the underlying idea is actually incredibly cool and intuitive.
It's essentially a pragmatic twist on the philosopher Karl Popper. Popper basically believed that ideas are constantly competing with each other in a marketplace, and the ideas that are the truest eventually win and survive. But this evolutionary theory flips that. It says, no, ideas don't survive because they are objectively true. Ideas survive because the human beings who held those ideas managed to survive.
It's pure Darwinian natural selection applied to human beliefs.
Exactly. If a specific cultural superstition, like, let's say, don't walk under a leaning ladder, or always save a portion of your harvest for a rainy day, if that belief has successfully survived being passed down for 500 years, there is a very good reason for it. It might not be the reason the story tells you. It might have absolutely nothing to do with avoiding magical bad luck. It might simply be that walking under active construction sites is highly dangerous because a heavy hammer might fall on your skull.
The why is the narrative, the bad luck. But the function is pure survival. Don't get hit by a hammer.
Correct. Grandmothers are the carriers of Lindy knowledge.
Lindy meaning things that have stood the test of time.
Yes, the stuff that has lasted through centuries of chaos. Now compare that to a modern business school curriculum or a flashy deck from a management consultant. That knowledge is brand new. It's completely untested by serious stress. The author calls it pink-coated.
Pink-coated, meaning it's shiny, it's attractive, it looks highly scientific and rigorous on paper.
But it fundamentally has not been battle-tested by time. It's very often just a clever marketing fad designed to sell consulting hours. The source makes a strong argument that blindly relying on abstract business school theories is highly dangerous, precisely because those theories haven't proven they can survive a massive systemic crash. Your grandmother's generational wisdom has survived world wars, massive economic depressions, and literal plagues. You should probably listen to her.
And this highlights what we call the expert problem. We have this deep-seated societal belief that credentialed experts make us safer. But the reality, especially in complex systems, is that they often make us wildly fragile.
Because experts, particularly in soft fields like macroeconomics or sociology or finance, simply do not know what they do not know. They possess incredibly high confidence, but very low actual competence when the real world stops following the textbook.
The absolute classic, terrifying example of this being long-term capital management.
LTCM.
The ultimate financial tragedy. So you had this massive hedge fund in the late 90s, and they literally had 2 Nobel Prize-winning economists sitting on their board of directors. These were universally considered the smartest men in the history of finance, and they built this incredibly complex, beautiful mathematical model that essentially declared risk is gone. We have completely solved the market.
And because they believed their own flawless narrative, they levered up. They borrowed staggering, incomprehensible amounts of money to amplify their trades. Because their model absolutely assured them it was 100% safe. And then a Russian government unexpectedly defaulted on its sovereign debt, which was an event their beautiful model had calculated was practically impossible. And when that black swan hit, LTCM completely blew up. And because they were so heavily leveraged, they nearly dragged the entire global financial system down with them.
If they had just been a little less intellectually smart, if they had operated a bit more like Fat Tony, They would have been terrified of that much leverage.
Exactly. Fat Tony would have looked at that situation and said, I completely do not understand this weird Russian debt thing, so I am out. I'm going to the pub. But the credentialed experts looked at the exact same situation and said, my mathematical model proves that this Russian thing is a minor statistical anomaly, therefore we should double down.
So high intelligence, when it's divorced from real skin in the game, when it lacks that messy, practical green lumber touch, is actually deeply dangerous.
It's completely explosive.
All right, we have covered an absolutely massive amount of ground today. From the painted wood of Joe Siegel, all the way to the imported universities of Abu Dhabi. From the raucous trading pits of 1980s London to the ancient souks of the Levant. What is the one core thing, the single big takeaway you want the listener to walk away with?
The ultimate takeaway is this. Constantly guard against confusing the map with the territory. Never confuse the intellectual definition of a thing with the actual function of the thing.
You do not need to understand the complex molecular structure of wood to build a sturdy log cabin. You just need to know if the wood is green.
And when you look at your own professional and personal life, try to ruthlessly separate the talkers from the doers. Be highly, highly skeptical of the person who presents a beautiful, flawless narrative but has zero actual track record of execution. And conversely, learn to deeply respect the messy, sometimes incoherent, highly practical knowledge that consistently gets real-world results.
Strive to be a little more like Fat Tony. Be a lot less like the polished analyst sitting in his pristine war room.
And honestly, maybe call your grandmother today and ask her for some life advice.
Now, before we wrap this up, I want to leave you with one final thought. Something a bit provocative to chew on after you finish listening. We touched on it very briefly in the notes. Inverse iatrogenics.
Oh, this is a fantastic brain teaser to close out on. So iatrogenics is a medical term for when a doctor actually harms you while trying to heal you, like getting an infection from a hospital. Inverse iatrogenics is the exact opposite. It's when doing something objectively wrong somehow ends up helping you.
Let's think about that carpenter again. Let's say he has a deeply held superstition. Let's say he firmly believes that if he doesn't physically bow to the east before he picks up his hammer, the ancient wood spirits will be angry and his project will fail.
That is an objectively, scientifically false belief. It is utter nonsense.
But ask yourself the functional question. Does holding that strange belief force him to focus? Does it act as a ritual that makes him treat his tools and the wood with deep reverence? Does it physically force him to slow down, clear his mind, and be vastly more careful with his measurements?
It almost certainly does.
So if that utterly false belief is the exact mechanism that leads to him building the finest, strongest, most beautiful chair in the world, does it actually matter that the belief is false?
It completely challenges our modern worldview. We are all so deeply obsessed with being factually and intellectually correct that we completely forget the ultimate goal is to be functionally effective.
So the final question for you is this. Where in your own life are you obsessing over the perfect truth of the narrative when you should really just be looking at the quality of the chair you're building?
That is the ultimate green lumber question.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. See you next time.